Welcome to Adult Sabbath School Podcast. Please subscribe to the channel, share it with a friend, and write any questions or comments you have below.
Here's how we're going to break this down. First, we're going to face the main controversy head-on. Then, we need to look at the world these events took place in. The context is everything. After that, we'll see how mercy somehow fits into this picture of judgment. We'll also zoom out to see how this fits a bigger pattern. And finally, we'll pull out the key lessons the sources say are there for us today. All right, first up, the Bible's toughest question. Let's not shy away from it. Let's dive right into the heart of what makes these passages so incredibly difficult for so many people. This is it. This is the question that's at the center of the whole thing. For skeptics, this is often Exhibit A against Christianity. And for believers, it can be a source of real, genuine confusion and discomfort. It just creates this tension that feels almost impossible to resolve, doesn't it?
Yeah, this apparent contradiction is so jarring that a lot of people just, they kind of skip over these stories. They prefer to stick to the parts of the Bible that feel a lot more comfortable. But the sources we're looking at today argue that if you look at the entire narrative, a consistent picture actually begins to emerge. And that leads us right into our next section, a world of abominations. Because according to these texts, to even begin to understand the judgment, you first have to understand the world in which it all happened. The context is absolutely key. The sources paint a really, really grim picture of the cultures in places like Egypt and Canaan. They describe societies where things like child sacrifice, ritual prostitution, and even demon worship weren't just things that happened on the fringes. They were central to their religious systems. The very character of their gods, who were full of violence and perversion, set the moral standard for the whole society. Now, this is an absolutely critical point. The texts frame this as a cosmic struggle, a battle between good and evil. For instance, think about the plagues on Egypt. The Bible is explicit that those were judgments against the gods of Egypt. This set a precedent that the conflict wasn't just physical. It was primarily spiritual, aimed at the corrupt systems that held people captive. But here's the thing, judgment is only half of the story. To really get the what, the sources insist we have to look at the why, the character and the motivation behind all of these actions. And this is where it gets really interesting, because it illustrates this principle of impartiality. The sources are crystal clear on this. God held his own chosen people, Israel, to the exact same standard. When they later fell into the very same practices as the Canaanites, child sacrifice, idolatry, they faced the very same judgment. There was no playing favorites.
This verse from the prophet Ezekiel, it really gets to the heart behind the judgment. The sources portray a God who doesn't enjoy punishment at all. Instead, he's pleading with people to turn away from these self-destructive paths so that he can save them. You can almost feel the agony in those words, not anger. And this idea of mercy, it's not a one-off thing. It is woven all through these texts. Judgment is consistently shown as a last resort, something delayed as long as humanly or divinely possible to give every single opportunity for change. The texts say God is long-suffering, he's incredibly patient, not wanting anyone to perish, and he's ready to change course the moment someone turns back. So we've got this tension, right? Judgment and mercy held together, but the sources argue this wasn't just some random, isolated incident. So let's zoom out for a second, because what happened in Canaan is presented as just one piece of a much, much bigger pattern. The word the sources keep coming back to is microcosm. Basically, what happened locally, right there in the land of Canaan, is presented as a small-scale model, a preview, if you will, of a much larger global theme of accountability that runs from the very beginning of the Bible all the way to the end. And this timeline, it just lays out that pattern so clearly. Look at the progression here. It starts in the past with a spiritual judgment on the gods of Egypt. Then it becomes a local, physical judgment, first on Canaan and then, remember, on Israel for the exact same sins. And all of it, the sources say, is pointing toward a future global judgment. It shows that accountability is this consistent theme from start to finish.
So here's a crucial point. These commands for holy war were given inside a very specific, unique context. A theocracy, a system where God himself was the direct national ruler. The sources really stress that this was a one-time, temporary, non-replicable system. It is absolutely not a model for modern governments to follow.
And check this out. Here's a really fascinating detail from the source material. God's original, ideal plan for taking Canaan was supposedly the same as what happened in Egypt. He intended to drive out the inhabitants supernaturally, with plagues and hornets and panic, without Israel ever needing to draw a sword.
It was only, the texts claim, because of Israel's lack of faith that military action became the necessary plan B. So, all of this brings us to our final section and the big so what question. What are the takeaways? Why do the sources present this ancient and, let's be honest, very difficult story as something that's relevant for us to understand today? The sources really boil it all down to 3 core principles. First, this idea of universal accountability. Basically, no one gets a free pass. Everyone is responsible for their actions. Second, there's this profound mercy. God is actively looking for anyone, even outsiders like Rahab, who is open to being saved. And third, it's a call to simple faith and loyalty. Ultimately, the resolution offered in these texts is, well, it's a future one. They seem to acknowledge that we might not have all the answers right now, from our perspective, but they promise a day is coming when every mystery will be cleared up and every person in the universe will see and agree that God's judgments were in fact completely true and righteous. And so, we're left with this final thought to chew on. The narrative we've explored presents a God who holds everyone accountable, but that accountability is tempered by this deep, passionate desire for mercy. The real question it leaves for us is, what does that dynamic, that tension, challenge us to consider in our own lives and in our world today?
Thanks for watching. See you next time.